today's episode is going to be regarding capital punishment, whether or not economically it makes sense, whether it's moral, and everything in between, so buckle up, today's video is going to be interesting. First things first, let's get into the background. Around 30 countries in the US still have the death penalty, including China, the US, Iran, Iraq, Saudi Arabia, and more. The median cost, meaning the average of the death penalty in the US, is $1.26 million per single execution. However, it really is a case-by-case basis. Some executions are more into the $2 million range I've even seen, and some are less than 1.26, but that is a good average to keep mind of. The total cost of capital punishment in California since 1976 is over $4 billion. That is only one of the 50 states in the United States. So the cost total in the whole country is likely a whole lot more. And 18 people were executed last year, 11 in 2021, 17 in 2020. And the final point I'm going to make in this slide is it's really important. 50 people, 4% of death row inmates executed, were found to be innocent. One would make the argument that one person found to be innocent that was executed is too much. So 50 people is definitely too much. And that will really tie into the morality point that I'm going to make here. The ways that death penalty is administered is as pictured, lethal injection, and as not pictured is the most second common way, electrocution through the electric chair. And there are some other ways, however, these are the two most predominant ways that the death sentence is administered in the U.S. So here are the states that have the death penalty, don't have the death penalty, and have governor-imposed moratorium. So the states that have the death penalty is the majority, 24, including Arizona, Nevada, Utah, Montana, Texas, Alabama, Mississippi, Georgia, Ohio, states like that. States that don't have the death penalty, 23 of which, so not the majority, Washington, New Mexico, Colorado, North Dakota, Minnesota, Virginia, New York, and then states that have governor-imposed moratorium, only 3 of which governor-imposed moratorium just means that it is a temporary ban based off who the governor is and that it could change. It's not a permanent thing. That is only 3 states, including California, Oregon, and Pennsylvania. So our first question today is the death penalty moral? So, here are some arguments that it is non-moral. The government should not be killing its people. Many killers would view a long prison sentence as more of a punishment, and non-moral to make other people kill other people. So our second point, which I highlighted killers, because it's important to remember that the people who are eligible for the death penalty are killers. They are murderers. Murderers predominantly in the first degree, or who premeditated their attack. And these aren't just your everyday everyday criminals who are getting the death penalty. They are cold-blooded killers that planned out their attack. And it's non-moral, the third point, non-moral to make people kill others, meaning penitentiary staff killing prisoners, because the people who are killing these death row inmates actually work for the prison. And this is a man named Frank Thompson who worked at a penitentiary who said, regardless of their crimes, the fact that I was now to be personally involved in their executions forced me into a deeper reckoning with my feelings about capital punishment. After much contemplation, I became convinced that on a moral scale, life was either hollowed or it wasn't, and I wanted it to be. So he's basically saying at the start of his prison, I read more into his case, at the start of his work at the prison, he was pro-capital punishment. He believed it was a fair basis of justice. But at the end of his work at this penitentiary, after being involved in the execution of 2 prisoners, he believed that it wasn't moral, it wasn't justice, it was murder, and that he didn't want to do that. He left the penitentiary, of course, and now he wrote this article that I quoted this from the New York Times, and he believed that life should be valued and that the death sentence is just another form of homicide or murder. So here are some arguments that it is moral. What the victim's family wants should go. It could deter people from committing crimes that may warrant capital punishment, and in that it sends a message. The second and third points are interrelated. I highlighted could because it's important to remember that the people committing these crimes are murderers who are not in the same mental state as you or I. In their mental state, they're not thinking, hey, I could end up receiving capital punishment or the death sentence for my crime. They're thinking, I'm going to go kill this person because that's what I want to do. And what the victim's family wants should go is an important point too, because of course the victim's family should have big impact in the ending of the person's life or the sentence they end up getting. But usually the jury has the decision in that case, and the jury overwhelmingly will vote not to give somebody the death sentence because they're humans too, and they're deciding whether or not that person will die. Is the death penalty economically worth it? So I'm just going to run through some statistics that I already laid out earlier in the video. The median or average cost is $1.26 million, and it's over $4 billion already spent in California alone. But here's where it gets interesting. $36,300 per year on average to keep somebody in prison. In California, in a state like California, it's probably a lot more. In a state like Montana or Idaho, it's probably a lot less. However, let's do the math. Let's say somebody's in prison for 30 years, okay? You can see the little multiplication table at the bottom. Let's say they're in prison for 30 years. Let's do the multiplication. That would end up being $1.089 million just for 30 years alone. But if it's a life sentence, they're likely going to be in prison for a lot longer. So if we actually do the math, it ends up being a very similar cost. So one could also make the argument that economically they're similar and that there's not a big difference and that it really should just be up to the family and what they did to end up deserving that sentence. So, the final point I'm going to make today is whether or not the racial disparities are a reason to stop capital punishment. The racial disparities in the criminal justice system exist. I'm not going to deny that, and that's why we're going to talk about this point. Around 12 to 13% of the U.S. population is made up of African Americans, but around 40 to 45% of death row inmates are African Americans. So let's get into some rough statistics here. These are not accurate. These are not exact mathematics. These are just rough numbers. 1 in 10 people in the U.S. are African American, but 1 in 2 people on death row are African American. Those are not. Those don't. That doesn't make sense. Like it just like that doesn't make sense when 1 in 10 people in the U.S. are African American, but 1 in 2 people on death row are African American. And we've seen the racial disparities in the criminal justice system. That's a thing that exists, and that's something that a lot of people in this country are fighting against. But to see it really put out in front of you in glaring statistics really draws that fact. And I want to give a graphic. So let's say on the left is the U.S. population, and this is kind of a childish way to draw it out, but it's an easy way to really understand it. Let's say the oranges are African Americans, and the pears are any other race. On the left is the U.S. population. On the right is the people receiving the death penalty. That's all I have to say. That if that doesn't show you that there's a racial difference, a racial gap, a disparity, then I don't know what will. But you can see that the quantity per U.S. population to death penalty, it's not, there's no math that can explain that. So that's a really important factor in whether or not the death penalty should exist. And on that token, I'm going to end it off by giving some scenarios. Let's say you're anti-capital punishment. If someone kills your mom, should they receive the death penalty? Tell me in the comments. Think about this. It becomes personal. But if somebody, let's say you're pro-capital punishment. If your mom kills someone, do you support killing your mom? Do you support giving them a death sentence? That's another point to really take into account, because it becomes personal for these families. It becomes personal for the family of the killer or the family of the victim. It becomes personal in any case, and it's important to remember that you're looking at it through a computer screen, but there are real people looking at it through the lens of their own eyes and looking at it in a courtroom, looking at their child, their mother, their husband, their cousin, sitting there in that chair, and whether or not they're going to die. So it becomes personal for a lot of people. So, I will end the video by saying and giving you a question that you can answer in the comments. Should capital punishment be illegal in all states? Tell me what your belief is in the comments. Based off what you've seen in this video, tell me what you think. And thank you for watching. I will see you in the next video. Bye.